Right now, in your kitchen, you probably have everything you need to make a proper British meal for under 50 pence a portion. Not a snack. A real, filling, warming dinner. The kind your grandmother made without blinking on a Tuesday night when the purse was thin and the gas meter was groaning. 3 ingredients. 1 pot. That is all it ever took. But somewhere between celebrity chefs and supermarket-ready meals, we forgot that the best British cooking was never complicated. It was clever. Number 19 on this list uses an ingredient that most people throw away. Number 8 was served in every pit village from Durham to Derbyshire without ever being given a proper name. And number 1 has kept this island fed through wars, rationing, and recessions alike. These 25 meals prove that feeding your family never required spending a fortune. It required knowing what your grandmother already knew. Let us count down. Number 25. Braised onion sausages. Before the grill pan became the default, British housewives knew the one-pot sausage supper that never failed. 6 pork sausages, 2 large onions sliced thin, a pint of stock with a crumbled cube. That was it. The onions went into the pot first, and they softened until golden and sweet. Then the sausages nestled among them, and the stock came up to the sides. Low heat, lid on, 40 minutes. The sausages plumped and browned at the edges, while the onions dissolved into a caramel broth. The smell drifted from the kitchen like a signal. Sausages cost about 1 shilling a pound in the early 1950s. A bag of onions cost pennies. The whole pot fed 4 people for under 2 bob, with thick bread to mop up the gravy. Modern cooks reach for a frying pan and cook them in 3 minutes flat. But those fast browned sausages have none of the depth that 40 minutes in onion stock produces. Your grandmother knew that sausages needed time, not heat. That is the difference. Number 24. Semolina pudding. Semolina rarely appears on an influencer's recipe page. It has no aesthetic. It does not photograph well. And it cost about 4 pence a serving in the 1960s, which perhaps explains why it disappeared so quietly. But for a generation of British children, semolina pudding was the warmth at the end of a cold school dinner. Coarse ground wheat, whole milk, a tablespoon of sugar, stirred slowly in a heavy pot until the grains swelled and the mixture thickened into a pale, creamy porridge. Served with a spoonful of strawberry jam dropped in the center, it turned the cheapest grain in the pantry into something genuinely comforting. In school canteens from Manchester to Bristol, semolina appeared twice a week, ladled by dinner ladies who gave no second helpings without a clean plate first. A bag today costs under £1 and makes 10 portions. Most people walk straight past it. That is their mistake. Number 23. Stewed apple. Every autumn, British gardens overflowed with windfall apples that nobody could use fast enough. Your grandmother's answer was the pot of stewed apple that sat on the back of the Aga all week. Cooking apples, peeled and cored. Water. A handful of sugar. The apples broke down into a sweet, tangy compote in 20 minutes, and the whole pot could be ladled over porridge at breakfast, spooned onto rice pudding at tea, or eaten cold from the bowl with a splash of evaporated milk. Cooking apples from the market cost a few pence a pound in the 1950s. From the garden, they cost nothing at all. Nothing was more satisfying than scraping the last amber spoonful from that pot and knowing the garden had provided. Today, people buy tins of apple compote that taste of nothing. The 3-ingredient pot takes 20 minutes and tastes of everything. Number 22. Lentil and carrot soup. Red lentils were the unsung hero of post-war British cooking. Cheap, protein-rich, and requiring nothing more than a pot of water and patience. 3 things were all you needed: red lentils, a few carrots, and a large onion. The onion and carrot softened in a scrape of fat. The lentils followed with enough water to cover by several inches, and the pot simmered for an hour on a low flame. The lentils dissolved into the stock and thickened everything into a vivid orange soup, filling enough to constitute a full meal with bread. A pound of red lentils cost about 6pence in 1955 and filled a pot that fed 6 people twice over. Carrots were the cheapest vegetable at the greengrocer. The whole pot came to under a shilling and lasted 2 days. The trick was not undercooking the lentils. Let them go completely soft until they begin to disappear into the stock. That is when cheap becomes nourishing. Number 21. Rice pudding. Short grain pudding rice, whole milk, a spoonful of sugar. 3 ingredients that British housewives turned into the most beloved pudding in the national repertoire. A tablespoon of rice per person was placed into a buttered enamel dish. Milk was poured over until it barely covered the grains. It went into a low oven for 2 hours, stirred once in the first 30 minutes, then left entirely alone while the top formed its golden skin. That skin was everything. Housewives and children fought over who got the thick, caramelized crust that had to be lifted in one piece. A tin of rice pudding from the shelf today costs over £1 and delivers something thin and pale. The real version costs about 30p to make and fills a family with warmth. By 1955, 7 in 10 British households made rice pudding at least once a week. It has not improved by becoming rarer. First pattern break. Here is something the modern food industry does not want you to think about. Every meal on this list requires almost no equipment beyond a pot and a heat source. No blender, no air fryer, no spiralizer, no gadget subscriptions. But since 1970, the average British household has spent more and more each year on kitchen equipment designed to solve problems that a good pot and patience already solved. The pressure cooker your grandmother used cost £3 and lasted 40 years. The soup maker, the multi-cooker, the slow cooker, and the instant pot together can cost hundreds. And what do they mostly produce? Soups and stews. Exactly what this list is. 1 pot, 3 ingredients. Already solved decades before any of those products were invented. Keep that in mind as we continue. Number 20. Butterbean and bacon soup. Tinned butter beans were the working family's protein before anyone called anything plant-based. They cost about 4pence a tin in the 1960s, and a tin of butter beans, 2 rashers of smoked bacon cut small, and a large onion produced a soup thick enough to stand a spoon in. Fry the bacon and onion until the fat runs and the onion softens. Add the drained butter beans and cover with water, then simmer for 25 minutes. The beans soften further, releasing their starch into the broth. A third of them mashed against the side of the pot thickens everything without adding anything. The resulting bowl is pale and creamy, shot through with smoky, savory richness, and filling enough that a child who eats a full bowl is not hungry again until morning. Butter beans today cost under 50p a tin. The whole pot feeds 4 people for well under £2. That is not poverty cooking. That is smart cooking. Number 19. Corned beef hash. The blue and yellow tin was a fixture in every British kitchen cupboard from the 1940s through to the 1980s. Inside, dense pink corned beef imported from Argentina arrived as a lifeline during rationing and stayed long after the ration books were burned. The hash needed only 3 things: corned beef, potatoes, and an onion. The potatoes were cooked first, diced, and cooled. The onion was fried until soft. Then the corned beef was broken in, mixed with everything, pressed flat into the pan, and left alone over medium heat until the bottom crisped into a dark, salty crust. Tins of corned beef sold for about 1 shilling in the early 1950s. Potatoes barely registered in the weekly budget. The whole dish cost under 2 shillings and fed 5 people. The trick was pressing the hash flat and not touching it while it browned. That crust made the plainest ingredients extraordinary. Most people today never discover that trick. Number 18. Mince and tatties. North of the border, this was the weeknight meal above all others. Beef mince, potatoes, and a large onion. The entirety of mince and tatties. The mince was browned in the pot with chopped onion until the fat ran and the meat darkened. Then water came in just enough to cover, and the pot simmered low for 40 minutes while the potatoes boiled separately. The mince turned into a thin, intensely flavored gravy as the cooking water took on the fat and the meat juices. Poured over floury mashed potato, it was rich, warming, and deeply satisfying in a way that nothing complicated ever quite achieves. Beef mince cost about 1 shilling and 6pence a pound in 1960. Potatoes and onions cost pennies. Oral histories from Glasgow tenements recall the smell of mince drifting down the close, the universal signal that it was time to come in from the street. That smell still means something. It means enough. Number 17. Leek and potato soup. Wales has been making leek and potato soup for centuries before anyone thought to add cream or call it vichyssoise. The original required only 3 things: leeks, potatoes, and water. Slice the leeks. Cube the potatoes. Cover with water, season with salt, and simmer for 30 minutes. Then mash roughly or leave chunky. The leeks dissolved into the stock, lending a mild onion sweetness, while the potato starch thickened everything into a pale, silky broth, both filling and light. Welsh families made this throughout winter on leeks from the allotment, potatoes from the bag under the stairs, and water from the tap. The cost was effectively nothing. Leeks were the symbol of the nation, partly because they were so colourful. Cheap, long-keeping, and flavouring everything they touched without demanding more. A bunch of leeks today costs under £1. 2 pounds of ingredients produces enough soup to fill 4 people twice over. In pit villages across Northumberland and Durham, this was not a recipe so much as a permanent fixture. The ham bone left from Sunday went into the pot all week. Dried split peas, soaked overnight, joined the bone with enough water to cover generously. An onion, if one was available. Then low heat and patience. 4 hours of slow simmering produced a soup so thick that oral histories from the northeast described a spoon standing upright in the bowl without tilting. The ham bone gave up every last vestige of flavor into the broth. The split peas dissolved into a golden green velvet, and the result was the most filling, economical meal the British kitchen ever produced. A bag of dried split peas cost about 4pence in the 1950s. A ham bone was often given free by the butcher. The soup cost almost nothing and fed a family of 6 for 2 full days. Most young British people have never tasted it. That is a genuine loss. You will notice that almost every meal on this list uses the same technique. Everything goes in together. Lid on, low heat, time. That single method, the slow simmer, the patient stew, produced the best British cooking that ever existed. It is not because the British were unsophisticated. It is because low heat and time are the 2 ingredients that no recipe lists and no supermarket sells. Your grandmother understood that cheap, tough ingredients transformed completely with enough time in enough liquid. Modern cooking reverses this principle. High heat, quick results. Tender meals require expensive ingredients because there is no time for the cheaper ones to become tender. Every slow-cooked dish on this list is proof that your grandmother's method was not old-fashioned. It was correct. Number 15. Cabbage and bacon broth. Take a head of hard white cabbage, about 40 pence at any market, a few rashers of smoked back bacon diced, and an onion. Put them all in a pot, cover with water, bring to a simmer, and leave for an hour. The cabbage softens and sweetens as it cooks, the bacon fat runs into the broth, and the whole pot develops a deep, smoky richness that smells like a proper kitchen. This was winter food in every sense. Warm, sustaining, and built from things that keep. Cabbage sat in garden stores for months without refrigeration. Bacon kept in the larder. An onion lasted weeks on the windowsill. These three ingredients were always there, which is why this broth was always there, ready for any day when the purse was too light for something else. Today, the same pot costs under £1 to make and produces enough for 4 people. Number 14. Porridge. In Scotland, porridge was not a trend. It was breakfast, supper, and the meal between other meals when there was nothing else. Rolled oats, water, a pinch of salt. The oats cooked low and slow for 20 minutes, stirred until they swelled into a thick, creamy paste that clung to the bowl and refused to let go. In the Victorian era, Scottish families cooked a large batch at the start of the week, poured it into a drawer to set firm, and cut slices to fry throughout the week. A family-sized bowl for 4 people costs under 20 pence today. It is the cheapest hot meal that has ever existed in this country. Number 13. Tomato and egg. When the tin of tomatoes and the egg box were all that stood between you and an empty plate, this was the answer. Onion softened in the pot, tinned tomatoes went in for 10 minutes, then eggs were cracked directly into the sauce and left to poach until the whites set and the yolks stayed soft. Bread for mopping. That was it. The whole dish cost under 1 shilling in the 1960s and fed 2 adults comfortably. The trick was not to stir the eggs. Drop them in, cover the pot 4 minutes, done. Number 12. Pearl barley broth. Pearl barley thickens any liquid it touches, fills ours any stomach it reaches, and costs almost nothing. The simplest version needed only pearl barley, a large onion, and a stock cube dissolved in water. 45 minutes of simmering produced something between a soup and a stew, dense enough to constitute a full meal on its own. A bag from the supermarket costs under £1 and contains enough for 8 to 10 portions. Most of it sits untouched on the shelf. That is a genuine waste. Number 11. Onion soup. 3 or 4 large onions, cooked very low in a knob of dripping until completely soft and golden. Then water, just water, added with a pinch of salt and simmered for 20 minutes. The natural sugars in the onions caramelized into the liquid, producing a sweet, savory depth that tasted like hours of proper stock making. Bread floated on top. This appeared in the Women's Institute recipe books from the 1930s through to the 1950s as the answer to a bare larder at week's end. The entire pot costs well under 50 pence. The only investment is 30 minutes, and the faith that something this simple can taste this good. It can. Third pattern, break. Here is the question nobody asks about cheap cooking. Why does food this simple taste better than it has any right to? The answer is what food scientists call the Maillard reaction. The browning that happens to sausages in a pan, to onions in dripping, to mince darkening before the stock goes in. Every entry on this list involves that reaction somewhere. Your grandmother did not know the chemistry. She knew the method. Brown it first, liquid second, time last. Nobody sold her a course. She learned by watching. That knowledge is still available to anyone patient enough to start with a pot and an onion. A bacon collar joint went into the pot in the morning with cold water to cover and simmered all day on the lowest possible heat. By tea time, the meat was falling apart and the water had become a salty, smoky broth. In the last 30 minutes, cabbage wedges were tucked around the joint to absorb the cooking liquor. 3 ingredients. The bacon fed the family at tea time and went cold for sandwiches the next 2 days. The cooking liquor became the next pot of soup. The supermarket age replaced all of this with sliced packets of processed ham that produce no broth and no savings. We traded the better deal for the convenient one. Number 9. Sausage and baked bean stew. Every British child of the 1970s and the 1980s ate this at least once a week, without anyone calling it a recipe. Pork sausages browned in a pot. A tin of Heinz baked beans poured over. An onion diced and softened first. 20 minutes of simmering. The beans provided the sauce, the protein, and the bulk. The sausages gave fat and flavor. A tin of beans cost 7 pence in 1975. A pack of sausages was under 30 pence. It appeared on a Friday when parents were too tired to think. Nobody called it anything. And sometimes it was better than anything else that week. Number 8. Potato soup. Potatoes. Onion. Water. Nothing else because nothing else was needed. The onion softened first. The potatoes were added in chunks. Water came up to the top, and an hour of simmering did everything else. A pound of potatoes in the 1950s cost about 3 pence. An onion was less than a penny. The water cost nothing at all. There is a reason this soup appears in every wartime cookery pamphlet and every Women's Institute handbook from 1940 to 1960. Because it works. Because it always worked. Number 7. Chicken broth. When the Sunday chicken had been roasted and picked clean, the carcass went into the pot on Monday morning. Bones, water. 1 large onion dropped in, skin and all. 3 hours of simmering. The resulting liquid was golden and deeply flavored with the gelatin drawn out of the bones. The carcass that most modern households bag and bin without ceremony was the starting point for a pot of broth that cost nothing beyond the water and the onion. In post-war Britain, throwing away a chicken carcass would have been considered reckless. It was money in the pot. That is what your grandmother understood, and what the convenience generation forgot. Red lentils dissolve as they cook, producing their own thick, creamy texture without any cream, and without any technique beyond patience. The ingredients are lentils, a large onion, and a stock cube dissolved in water. Simmer for 35 minutes without interference. A 500-gram bag costs under a pound and contains enough for more than 20 servings. During the post-war years, lentil soup fed mining communities and mill families across Britain. In that context, the lentil was not humble. It was essential. That context is worth remembering the next time you walk past the 69 pence bag. Number 5. Suet dumplings in broth. Flour and suet mixed with cold water. Dropped into any simmering broth, they expand into pale, dense rounds that soak up liquid like a sponge. The third ingredient is the broth itself, which can be as simple as a stock cube in water. What was thin becomes substantial. What was barely a soup becomes a proper meal. Your grandmother used this when the pot was running low, and more mouths than expected had arrived at the table. Flour and suet were always in the larder. 2 minutes to make, 15 minutes to cook, and nothing else achieves that transformation at that cost. Number 4. Bread soup. This is the entry that will surprise the most people. Stale bread, broken into rough pieces, is dropped into simmering onion stock and left to absorb the liquid entirely. The bread thickens the stock into something with the texture of a heavy broth, and the flavor of everything in the pot. Victorian cookery manuals recommended it because bread retained its calories even when stale. In post-war homes, it made sense for a simpler reason. Nothing went to waste. The bread that could not be eaten as bread became soup. The soup fed the family. Full stop. Number 3. Oxtail stew. Oxtail was the cheapest cut the butcher sold for most of the 20th century because most people did not know what to do with it. Your grandmother knew exactly. Brown the pieces in the pot. Add a roughly cut onion. Cover with water and leave on the lowest heat for 4 hours. 3 ingredients. 4 hours. The cartilage dissolved into the cooking liquid, producing a gelatin-rich gravy that coated everything it touched. The cheapest cuts produce the richest pot in the British canon. Oxtail at most butchers today costs well under £3 a kilo. The pot it produces is worth 10 times that. A bacon hock is placed in a pot with green or brown lentils and enough water to cover. 2 hours on a low simmer. The hock gives its smoke, its salt, and its gelatin to the lentils, which absorb everything around them into a dark, thick, intensely flavored broth. The meat pulled from the bone falls back into the pot. This is not soup. It is something thicker and richer than that word suggests. Every coal mining family in the north ate some version of this through the worst winters of the 20th century. Nothing about it has changed. Nothing about it needs to. Number 1. Potato, onion, and dripping. Potatoes cut into chunks. Onions sliced thick. Beef dripping melted in the bottom of a heavy pot. The potatoes and onions were turned in the hot fat to coat every surface. Then the lid went on, the heat was dropped to the lowest setting, and the pot was left for 40 minutes. They steamed in their own moisture until completely soft and beginning to caramelize at the edges. The smell was extraordinary. This dish had no name. It was not in any recipe book. It was what you made when there was nothing else. And when you made it properly, it was better than most things that had a name. 3 ingredients, 1 pot, 1 hour. Your grandmother did not think of it as clever. She thought of it as Tuesday. That is the entire point. 25 meals, 3 ingredients, 1 pot. Every one of them under £1 a portion, most under 50 pence. Try the potato and onion in dripping this week. Tell me in the comments which one you are making first. Because your grandmother was not cooking out of poverty. She was cooking out of knowledge. And that knowledge has been sitting here all along.